NORAD has been called, and fighter jets with missiles are on their way. It's going to change your frame of mind about how long you want to continue your protest.
We had the one in Chicago where the engine failed and it threw parts, half a mile or a mile away. That was like a bomb going off.
But I saw reports that it was up to 10 people from Homeland Security coming to pull this out off. So,
Aeromexico pilots, why would you land over top of that airplane that's on the roll? Well, welcome everybody to Hangar Flying. I'm Captain Steeeve, and I'm joined by my co-host, as always, Gary B. Pilot. Go throw some love over to his channel. Gary, it's good to see you today. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you, Captain Steeeve?
Good. I can see that you're on the road, and that's going to be kind of a thing here at this show, is I'm going to be on the road, you're going to be on the road. We had a great response to our first episode out last week. Lots of great comments. Keep them coming, folks, on that. This week, there's a bunch of stuff in the news, aviation related, and I want to get your thoughts on it. There wasn't two, there wasn't three. There were three near mid-airs this week. Unbelievable. What a week. And then there was a pilot pulled off an airplane in handcuffs this week. And then going back a few weeks, there was another guy pulled off an airplane in handcuffs. So we want to talk about all of that. But I kind of want to get your thoughts initially on this week and the week of the near midair. And the three are Aeromexico down in the overfly on the runway, the B52 up at Minot, and the third one was the TCAS incident with Southwest out of Burbank. So why don't we start with the Burbank one? What do you think about that? What happened there?
Well, those are all, as you mentioned, it's kind of crazy to have. It seems to be feast or famine with a lot of these things. It's like you get, all of a sudden you get nothing, and it's real quiet, and then all of a sudden you get a lot at once. And, real quick, I just want to say the example I give to people is people say, why is this happening all at once? Why is this happening all of a sudden where we get a bunch? And I say, it's kind of like, I'm not a big gambler, but if you're playing blackjack, right, you're playing and you can go a long time without hitting a blackjack, and then all of a sudden you can get three in about a 5-minute period. So I would say that it's kind of the law of probability sometimes, where things just happen to line up, and it's not necessarily anything specific. But the Burbank one, I did see that Jimmy Dore, the comedian, was I guess he's a comedian podcaster. I don't know him as that well, but he was on that flight, and I guess he tweeted that people had went up and hit their heads on the ceiling. And so I guess 2 flight attendants had been injured, and it was a TCAS, what we would call an RA. And from my understanding, it was another jet that was crossing from east to west as they were kind of heading more north. And, what's weird is I saw it on the chart. It didn't look like it was that close. But then again, sometimes, I didn't have the details. So, I would say that's what, that's one of the reasons why we have TCAS, is it's a great tool as our last step, that no matter what happens, that it's, obviously in DC, it's like, we got a little bit, that's a whole different story. But generally speaking, I would guess that TCAS has probably saved thousands of times, in my opinion. What's your thoughts?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. And so for our audience, TCAS is a traffic collision avoidance system. It's a system that airplanes transmit out to other airplanes back and forth, and it gauges the closing rate of other airplanes, their altitude and all that. And then it will send both airplanes a warning, not the same warning, but warnings for one to climb and one to descend, so that they avoid each other based on the closure rate. The system works really well. Every time you and I go to training every 9 months, we have to do a TCAS event in the simulator where we practice turning off the autopilot, turning off the auto throttle, and either, descending or climbing based on whatever the TCAS alert is. And so you mentioned TA versus RA. So a TA is a traffic advisory, which at first the computer will give you a heads up and it'll say traffic, just like that. How much is that? Pretty good? Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually really good. I think that you should get paid.
I've only heard it thousands of times, right? And you don't do anything when it says that. You just look up and you're like, where is the traffic, right? So you're looking outside, and then if it wants you to climb or descend, it's going to transition to an RA, which is a resolution advisory, and then it's going to tell you to climb or descend, and the screen in front of you is going to give you a green band to pull your nose of your aircraft up into. So it's pretty straightforward. It's almost what I call pilot proof, right? You just follow the little green arrows and away you go. It is possible to overdo it. You could get excited and overreact. And one of the things that they try to train you in is just smoothly pull the airplane, up or down. I think if you're going to descend, which they did out of Burbank, the descending one is more dangerous for the folks in the back because they can go floating through the air.
Yeah.
And I heard some flight attendants got hurt. Right. So I think that's the more dangerous of the ones, and it depends on kind of how aggressive the pilots get with it. Now, if they need to get aggressive, then obviously they have to do what they have to do. If they were a little overly aggressive, I can't say. I wasn't on that aircraft.
Yeah, and in fact, I don't know about you. The last 2 times I've been in the sim, because in the wide body, if you don't get the landings in, you got to go a little bit more. But the last 2 times they had an RA where they put a plane below me and a plane above me to practice. So they gave you a little narrow band that you couldn't overdo it down, you couldn't overdo it up, and you had to fly that perfect band where they crossed you there. So I thought that was interesting, of getting a little more. They try and teach you a little more finesse, but as you said, at the end of the day, it's a little bit of being uncomfortable or even injuries would beat actually colliding in midair. So
sure. Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the training, because it's so thorough, the training we get, when we go down there. They run through every possible scenario. So there's the climbing one, there's the descending one, and then, like you said, there's one where they put you in a sandwich. There's an airplane above you and below you, and the computer just says monitor vertical speed, which means don't touch a nothing, right? Just keep what you got. And I hate the monitor vertical speed one, because I feel like I want to do something, but that's just hold what you got, and it resolves itself, and it's good. So the system works. And in the Burbank situation, the system worked. Unfortunately, some people got hurt in the process, but that's a whole lot better than a midair. I think we could all agree on that for sure.
Yeah, it's really good that somebody that was what those limited to. But it brings us to the larger picture of it's why are these things happening? Do you think what's your opinion? Is it because that there is something going on, or is it just kind of a chance, in your opinion?
So let me give you the numbers on that. And I got contacted by a reporter that wanted me to come on a News Nation or something. I was on a trip and I couldn't do it. But I went and talked to him and did some research on my own. And there have been 7 reported near midairs in 2025. The normal at this point, 7 months into the year, is 15. So we're actually 50% lower than we normally are. Now, having 3 in 1 week, and all the other airplane things that have happened in the past 8 months, it's right, headline news, right, when something like this happens. So we're actually doing much better at this point in the year than we normally do with near midairs.
Yeah, and that's something that shows that sometimes, the stats and things can be skewed in any which direction.
Yeah, everybody wants to sensationalize them for the clicks on their headlines. Okay, so that's the Burbank near midair. The B52 up in Minot, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, to be honest, I don't know as much about that. I've just read the basic, the data and the headlines, and I read the article. So, my first thought is, what is a B-52 doing that close to another passenger jet? But I know you did a whole video on that, so I think you would have more of a unique take on what happened there.
Yeah, I put out a video earlier in the week on the B-52 Minot thing, where we talked about uncontrolled airfields and what it means to, the common traffic advisory frequency, which is a VHF frequency that all of the airplanes coming into an uncontrolled field would go on, and they just basically broadcast where they are to the other airplanes. Now, the update on the B-52 incident was this, and I didn't know it at the time, but more has come out since then, is that they were doing an air show. So I think they were doing a flyover of some sporting event someplace. And typically, if you do a flyover of an event, you turn your transponder off. And the reason you do that is because you're going to go down real low level, like you're going to go down to 500 feet, maybe 300 feet. And you don't want to set everybody's screen off all over the place that you're having a low level incident. So you just turn all that off. And so that's why they weren't transmitting. They fly over the event and they're headed right into the pattern at Minot. And now Minot is at times an uncontrolled field, and other times it is a controlled field. The pilot, the captain, came on and made a PA after the near miss, and basically said, the tower didn't have any radar coverage. So I don't know if that means they were unmanned at the time and everybody was just trying to do their own separation, or if the radar just wasn't working. The point is everybody was flying around kind of blind. And this B-52, which it's a huge airplane, comes kind of barreling through at a low level. These things can happen, and the heads up to the Delta crew. that saw him coming. And one of the things that they trained you and I right from day one is, number one, listen up on the radios. Number two, keep your head on a swivel, right? And so when you're in a situation like that where the radar's not working or maybe the control tower is not manned, you're doing this the whole time. You're looking outside the airplane. And a B-52 is not hard to spot. And they saw the B-52. Now, the story from the military was the commuter jet overreacted, okay? And so that's their opinion. If I'm in the Delta jet and I see a B-52, I don't want to get anywhere close to it. And so, they said they didn't overreact. Whatever it is, it had a good outcome to it, even though it was, we're going to put it in the category of a near, midair.
Nice.
So, all right, so that resolves the B-52 near midair. The one I really want to talk about now is Aero Mexico and Delta down in Mexico City. What the literal heck happened down there? Gary, take it away.
Well, as again, you do a lot more videos and content than me, but from the article I read, it seemed pretty severe and serious that what happened, and so it sounds to me like what I understand is that the Aero Mexico flight overshot and went into the lane of the Delta, but I do know that it was it seems from what I read, it was a lot more of a serious situation than just like a normal TCAS, and that they're putting on like a full investigation from my understanding. So I don't know. I know Mexico City is a tough with mountains, with missed approach, with and I'm sure you've been in there plenty of times in your career, but it's not. It's a tricky airport, and there's a lot going on. Mexico City is a huge city, so again, I want a little bit more information. And as you and I know, this is why we do it, because the news will tell you something, and then you find out more information later, and it's like, that's not the story. That doesn't make sense, or that's only part of the story. So, that's all I've seen so far. But it does, as I said, it seemed like it came close and was, fairly serious.
Yeah, I haven't done a standalone video on that one yet, but I think later on today I'm actually going to film one, and I've been doing my research for it. And so for the listening audience or the watching audience that hasn't heard about this thing down in Mexico City, Delta was cleared into what's called lineup and wait. So that they put him in position on the runway just prior to giving him clearance to take off. So they're on runway 5 right down there, very long runway. They're on 5 right, getting ready to take off. So they own the runway when they get put on the runway. Meanwhile, an Aero Mexico flight is coming in and gets cleared to land on the same runway. Now that's not unusual. I've been put in lineup and wait a bunch of times, and an airplane behind me in the air gets cleared to land. Now I'm assuming, because I don't have eyes in the back of my head, that airplane is 5, 7, 10 miles away, right? So they can clear somebody to land knowing I'm going to be long gone by the time they get to the runway. That's not what happened down in Mexico City. So Delta gets cleared for takeoff. These other guys are on short final, and Delta starts their takeoff roll when Aero Mexico flies right over the top of them and lands on the same runway. So I'm like, what the literal heck is going on? First of all, they got cleared to land on a runway where another airplane was sitting there. Delta did nothing wrong. They can't see what's going on behind them. But the Aero Mexico pilots are looking out the window. Can you not see an airplane on the runway? And why would you land over top of that airplane that's on the roll? I'm scratching my head. I can't figure that one out in the least.
I see, and that's new information to me. The article I said I either missed that or they didn't mention that, because I cannot believe that you would land. That's like, to the listeners, they don't understand how unusual that is, if ever. I mean, I don't know if there's ever been a time where somebody gets cleared to land. Now it's not unusual. Sometimes they stack it too close, and somebody, the plane behind has to go around. And right. I don't know about you, but I've basically guessed at 500 feet. When we hit that 500 mark, 500 stable target sync, that call when we're coming into land, as long as the plane in front of us is rolling, I've found that that's enough time to clear before where we can land. So it's, as people said, it's very common, as you were mentioning, to come in to get cleared on, somebody's coming behind. But to a plane to land over the top of another plane is that exactly. I'm like you. I don't understand how that happens. I mean, it's, and again, you never want to judge too much, because you're like, what was the situation? Was there a building blocking there? But no, of course not. You can see the threshold. You can see the runway. So that one is that's a head scratcher for sure. So the to land over the top of a plane, I'm guessing you either saw and you just decided, well, we were cleared to land, not our problem. But
I,
I
I
know in
know.
other countries, I've seen some crazy things in other countries, but even that was
Yeah.
that's probably pushing it.
Well, you and I always talk about get home itis. On that last leg when you're going back to your home base, and it's like the horse is going back to the barn. But that's the worst case of get home itis I've ever seen. Like I'm just going to land right on top of this guy, and fortunately Delta saw it, stopped, and then and the video I'm going to do later on in the week on this one, the guys keyed up the mic and the Delta pilots keyed it up, and all they said was "Wow." All right. And another Aero Mexico flight keyed up the mic and said, incredible in Spanish, And so that everybody just had a one word response to what they had just witnessed, like unbelievable. Like what just happened? And then, they basically take the Delta flight and they taxi him off. And I guess they sat off the runway for an hour before they finally taxied back to the gate and everybody get off because, they're going to have to do a whole investigation on something like that. So, again, real head scratcher, but we'll dig into it and I'll do a deep dive on it in another video. So 3 near mid-airs in a week. The one's the worst I've ever seen, that Aero Mexico thing. So let's talk about now the guy that was pulled off the airplane in San Francisco in handcuffs. So what do you know about that?
Well, I saw a bunch of like articles or initial reports because initially Delta didn't say anything. Initially, Homeland Security didn't say anything, so it was very left to vague. And literally all I saw was just jokes about Delta for about 100 pages of that was the initial like why he didn't report light chop is why he got arrested. There was constant jokes about Delta. So now there's some serious allegations coming around. I just I don't, since there's nothing confirmed, obviously, I would just say that it's obviously very serious. I've never seen, even when they come on for somebody on a plane that's, when it's get arrested, it's usually like, 1 or 2 people. But I saw reports that it was up to 10, you know, people from Homeland Security coming to pull this out off. So, obviously, you never want that to happen to anybody in the pilot community. And, but, it's a very it looks to be a very serious alleged crime, and you can hope that that wouldn't be the case, but if it is, then it's like it has to be dealt with, obviously.
Yeah, it's so rare the way that happened because I think if you think historically back, a pilot's been arrested going into the airport, and maybe there was a guy that was drinking and he shouldn't have been, and somebody smelled his breath. We've heard those stories in ancient history. That happen on occasion, but getting pulled off an airplane where you're the working crew, and then, like you said, like 10 people showed up. So it's a really serious deal. We'll try to get the details for you going forward, but that is really, you don't see that. I've never seen that ever, except for one other incident, which happened a little while ago, a few weeks ago. Another pilot in Minneapolis got pulled off an airplane in handcuffs. And Kelsey over at 74 Gear just did a really good video on this. So go check out his video on this pilot that got arrested in Minneapolis. But he got pulled off because of suspicious behavior. And he went through a security checkpoint. And before going through it, he kind of did an about face and sort of scurried off in the other direction. Went as far away as he could, found a bathroom, went in for 27 seconds, came back out. All of that alerted everybody's attention to his behavior, and then they found a bottle of booze in I think a waste can that he had thrown out, and so there's lots of details that go around with that. But he was pulled off an airplane that he was a working crew member on, and put in handcuffs. So that's twice now in recent history, at least not this past week, but recent history, where we've had pilots arrested. And so there's another thing that again is kind of a head scratcher, and you know.
Yeah, yeah. I think the thing is that people forget is that pilots are still human beings. So over enough when you multiply us over, let's say there's 100,000 pilots in the U.S. It's just you're gonna get some unfortunate situations like this. But it's always a good reminder. I would say generally speaking that we still, I bet you if you were to run the numbers, I'd say we have a lower incidence of these types of issues, and it's happened obviously throughout our careers, but I would say it's more on the rare side. It's not like it's every month you're finding, oh, somebody's getting arrested for that. So
Right.
it's a wake up call to anybody else that's remember that's like it's if you need help, you got to get help, get yourself treated, and obviously it's like it's just zero tolerance for this kind of stuff. There's too many lives at risk. You can't be risking it's just not worth it on any sense. And so, it's obviously, it's not like, you watch this and you're like, oh, this is a really joyful, experience, or it's like, oh, it's glad, obviously glad somebody gets caught for what they're doing, but it's like, it's sad to see the situation that somebody gets to this point.
Sure, it does. And we've done several videos now on this channel, and we're going to continue that conversation about pilot mental and emotional health, because I think it's an important conversation to have in this space. That's what we're doing on Hangar Flying, right? We're doing that old-fashioned hangar talking, and just talking about stuff that is affecting pilots and affecting the safety. I think you're right. It's probably, my guess would be, in our space, the piloting space, those incidents are probably lower than the general population, although maybe not. I'm hoping that they are. I think the expectation from the general public is a lot higher, as it should be, about pilots' behavior. And so with that being said, there's certain pressure put on pilots to compartmentalize things, or to tamp things down in their life, and try to keep your home life over here. But sometimes home life spills over into professional life, and then it shows up in the worst possible way as being carted off in the airplane in handcuffs. For sure.
Yeah.
You should have caught it a whole lot sooner than that. So good. Well, good conversation, man. Quite the week-ish in aviation, and lots to talk about here on Hangar Flying. I want to jump now to an interview I did with a guy named Bert Booth, and he's a former captain I used to fly with back when I had dark hair like you, and I was a young guy, and I learned a lot from Booth. And he's just a terrific guy, very, very knowledgeable. He's got a post now. He retired from his airline, and he's now flying in his retirement professionally. Still very, very smart guy. And he and I talked about the 767 fire, the left engine fire on Delta out of LAX, and that crew, in my opinion, did a textbook job with an engine fire, just exactly how you and I are trained. And Bert and I discuss it next. You're going to like this interview with Bert. Let's cut to the interview, and then I'll come back and get your thoughts on Bert. I got a very special interview for you this week on Hangar Flying. A good friend of mine, Captain Bert Booth, is going to join us. I learned so much from flying with Bert over the years. He's an experienced guy. He's got lots of time in an airplane that I love, the 767. And so let's welcome Bert. Bert, how are you? It's good to see you. It's been a while. And tell us a little bit, introduce yourself to our audience. And I know you real well, but tell them, about your background, the airplanes you've flown, and basically what you want to do when you grow up.
Well, I'm still working on the growing up part. I was fortunate in college, my junior year, I started flying for a commuter with deregulation. Actually, my first flight was like 3 days before deregulation. How that happened, I don't know. Then 6 months later, I went to a corporate, that was in Navajo. 6 months later, I went to corporate flying, went to Cheyenne 2, did an interesting trip to Cuba that I mentioned to you. A year later, I was 20, just short of my 22nd birthday as a Cheyenne 2, Cheyenne 3 captain. Then I went to fly a Twin Otter and Embraer at a commuter. Then I switched to Henson Airlines, now Piedmont, and flew a Beech 99 Shorts -7. Joined the Maryland Air National Guard, flew A-10s there. Got out of that, got on with American. At American, I've flown the A300, A320, A330, Super 80, 727, 737, 750, 767, 777, 787. And then in retirement, I flew a Phenom. So I think I've got 11 type ratings, 18 type rating courses, 27,000 hours,
So for those young pilots listening to this guy's got the resume. Bert has flown everything. 11 type ratings. That's just the amount of work and the check rides and study that goes into all that is dizzying to me. But you and I met when you were flying the 7.6. We were at the same airline. You were captain, I was an FO. Bert got hired in the mid 80s at the airline, and that was in the middle of the hiring boom. So he was a captain a whole lot longer. I was an FO a whole lot longer. I got hired at the very end of that. But consequently, I learned a lot from you, because one of my takeaways from flying with Bert Booth was not only you were a very good pilot, but you were really knowledgeable about airplanes and systems. and more so than a lot of the other captains I flew with. So I would pick your brain on stuff, and you would share things with me. I think of any of the people I flew with, at least at the commercial airline, I probably got the most from you of any other captain I flew with. So, and you've earned that praise from good old Captain Steeeve here. So Bert, what I want to talk about was I sent you a video I did last week about a 767 Delta out of LAX. They have an engine fire on their left engine shortly after takeoff, and I want you and I to kind of hangar fly a little bit with a scenario like that. So as I told my audience on that video, I thought it was absolutely textbook the way they handled it. But let's say you and I are flying again. We're on that good old 767. We've just taken off out of LAX. We're at 1,500 feet, and you get that fire warning that shows up on the ICAS screen in front of you. As the captain, now take us through your thought process. Where are you going with this? Once you see that first initial, you got a problem warning on the screen.
Well, obviously, you got to make sure one guy's flying the airplane. That never changes. The next thing is when we have immediate action, bold face, red box. Now they call it the Q or H, immediate steps. Verify those steps are done. We've seen that, unfortunately, recently that that has been done poorly.
Yeah.
At times. It is a time to slow down. You know, if you watch guys who do it, it's a very deliberate, slow process. Do you see my hand here? Yes. Do you agree with me? That's the mental part.
Okay.
And then the thing is with the automation, I watched that video. They did a very nice job, but I saw the video and I saw them turning out of traffic on the vector, which they do anyway at LA. So if the plane is flying well, help ATC if you can. They still have their flaps out, which I wondered is the automation at that point has gone to continuous power. At 1,000 feet, it gets out of climb power, out of takeoff power, and it goes to, in a sense, climb power, which is basically continuous power. There's no cleanup procedure with an engine failure with flaps out at climb power. You have to get back to takeoff power to complete the takeoff portion, and that continues until you have the plane clean, and then you talked about going con. Continuous power is the end of the takeoff portion. Then you go continue with the checklist, continue with ATC.
Right. And that you need that extra power with the flaps down because of all that drag that's still out there, right? Because you could start to get slow now, which you don't want to do. And then you might have to descend to gain airspeed. And so you're right about knowing what the automation is doing. And at those moments where you get that big light on the screen, and we're human beings, even though we've trained for this a lot, your heart starts to pound a little bit. You know, like, oh, there it is for real. We're not in the simulator. This is for real. And how bad is the fire? You don't know. Now, looking at that Delta, as you can see, the video was great. It looked like the fire was coming out from underneath the engine, which indicates to me that it was probably a fuel line or something underneath and not the engine itself, which is a comfort. But they don't know that up in the cockpit. All they've got is that fire warning. So you're right. So get the airplane cleaned up, get it configured. They might have turned back a little bit early on that. I don't know if they were completely done. Some of those ATC audios that we get, they cut a little bit out because that was probably a 15-minute evolution for them to get back to the runway, and we only did a 6-minute, ATC. So there might have been some things that were cut out. So let's assume that they got the airplane cleaned up and they got that continuous power that you were just talking about. Now we want to turn back to the airport. As a captain, what do you think? Because you got a lot of stuff to do as you're headed back to the airport.
And that's a couple of things you're talking about when events happen. We get startled to a certain extent, or your brain goes, really, like the guy you said when he lost the engine. He's like,
really?
No, this isn't happening. Yes, but I also tell people at the time is don't overthink it. Take a deep breath and let the training happen.
Right.
And it just go back to your steps, and that getting back to your steps refocuses your mind and gets you away from drama and stress, and it just says this is what we do. Okay. But yeah, you're busy. I mean, we went through training at one point where they filmed us in our heads and they sped it up because they had to review the whole thing, but you don't want to watch 4 hours of videotape and all you see is the heads doing this. as we're looking around, especially when we're running problems, is just every time the other guy does something, you want to glance to make sure, as the pilot flying, that he is doing it correctly. Because it just leads down to other rabbit holes if he touches the wrong switch. Again, we're talking about being very deliberate on some of these actions. But you're busy. You're just busy. Like you said, you get your basic checklist, you get to the end of the continuous climb, now you've done the engine failure profile. But in this case, they'd actually gone to the climb profile, but they hadn't finished the takeoff phase when they lose the engine. Another issue that comes up is they lost a fire, they shut the engine down, they didn't think the other engine was giving them rated power, so they're dumping fuel until short final because they weren't certain the plane would fly. Well, the reason why they did all of this is they took the hand off the throttles and went to two-fisted flying, and the power was a continuous, and it pulled back from when he pushed it up to, toga power, it went to climb power, and now it won't accelerate. They don't have enough thrust to exceed the drag to get rid of the flaps.
Okay, so
now they're thinking I got one weak engine and one engine shut down. So I'm not a fan of two-fisted flying. I like to have one hand on the throttles, so if the throttles move, you get a sense of, what happens, and you actually look at the gauge and look at the mode you're in to say, what am I asking for? What is the airplane doing?
right, yeah.
Any
So
doubts, turn it off and go manual.
yeah, I'm a huge fan of the same thing. One on the yoke, and another on the throttles. Explain that dynamic to our audience now. How can a pilot set the power and the power rolls back on him? What is causing that?
Well, that's the auto throttles. I mean, that's, we talk about being mode confusion, where you think the airplane or the auto throttles in this case are going to give you climb power. Well, people thought the training we all did was we always failed the engine with climb at takeoff power. Then they started, this event happened, and they switched the training where now you have your after departure, you're in a turn and they fail the engine because they want to find out, like this Delta crash where they're in the left-hand turn, the flaps are still out, and my thought is are they at takeoff power or are they at climb power? Because if they're at climb power, they're going to have difficulties getting that plane clean. The thing in their favor is they were doing probably a transcon, so the plane is not that heavy. It's a 6-hour flight, where the event that we had at our company, they were going on an 11-hour flight, so the plane was much heavier.
Right. So that's good. So you not only got to manage the emergency that's presented to you, you've got to make sure you're flying the airplane, overcoming that startle effect, right? And making sure that somebody is flying the airplane. You're saying one hand on the yoke, one hand on the throttle. And you've also got to manage the automation that might be doing something you don't want it to do. So you've got like a hierarchy of power settings. You got takeoff power, then climb power, then this continuous power. And if you're in a phase where you're already in continuous power, but you need some more power, you can push up the throttles, but the auto throttle will bring them back on you. So you can go into the computer and get the power setting you want. So the auto throttles are your friend at that point, but that's one more thing to manage. That's why it gets so busy up in the cockpit. I loved, we've done a lot of these videos where, there's an engine failure or something, or they're coming back to the airport. And some of the air traffic controllers are terrific because they get what's going on in the cockpit. And they start asking the crew, do you need more time? How far do you want to go? Right? And they're walking along with the pilot, giving them enough time. They're not trying to rush them into anything. And one of the things I like is that when the air traffic controller tells you what they would like you to do next, but they don't force you into it. I've heard air traffic controllers say to the crew that's got 10 things on their plate, well, what do you want to do next? What altitude do you want? What approach do you want? What runway do you want to land on? You know what? I don't have time to think about it. Tell me where you want me to go, and I'll make that work. I've got 10 other things I got to take care of right now. So I thought air traffic control out of LAX was great. I thought the crew was great. So they're coming back towards the airport now, and you and I were trained into doing 2 out and 2 in. And so I tried to show that to my audience a bunch. The 2 out were tell air traffic control what you're doing and what your intentions are. The other is get a hold of your company and dispatch. To me, that's a lower priority. If I have time to do that, I will. And then the 2 in are the flight attendants, right? Because they need to get the cabin ready for landing. And if you just took off, and you're coming back within 10 minutes, they got a lot to do back there. And then again, the passengers, right? Because they know in this age of video cameras, there's 25 cameras on that side of the airplane, all videoing the flames coming out of the back of that engine. So you got to calm them down and reassure them what's going on. So, Bert, you're coming back to the airport now. You've got all your checklists done. What sort of things are you thinking about now landing a single engine airplane that's unusual or different than a 2-engine aircraft from your perspective?
As you mentioned, the plane comes in faster. We're going with flaps 20 for a single engine. Big thing there is it doesn't have the leading edge devices in the full mode, which is less drag by having them in the mid-range. And you come in faster, hotter. Again, you're going to have them check you out, the ARF people, because of the possibility of hotter brakes. Again, you don't have to get on the brakes that hard on a long runway, so you can manage the energy that you put into the brakes. That is one of the things is don't try to make the normal turn off with a heavier airplane. Let the plane use the runway to a safe limit,
Right.
Not all the way to the end. And then, again, that's the big thing is, can you get eyes onto the fire? Is it a small fire like the size of my riding lawnmower burning? Well, then maybe that's not the point to evacuate, put people out at risk of injury into the fire equipment, etc. On the other hand, is like we had the one in Chicago where the engine failed and it threw parts, half a mile or a mile away. That was like a bomb going off. There's no doubt that fire is catastrophic and you need to get out. So what is the level of the fire? And to have professional eyes on talk to you can sometimes help. And I've actually heard guys on the radio say, you're on fire, the left engine is burning, I would evacuate. Because he's an outside source, another pilot who's looking at an airplane going, ooh, that looks bad.
That's why the training is so important, because in those instances where you kind of get the tunnel vision for a little bit and your heart is pounding, you revert back. You're going to fight the way you trained, right? You're going to execute the way you were trained, and they train us over and over and over again in these procedures so that when it happens for real, we're ready. But you can see now from your perspective, this is great for our audience, how many things a flight crew, captain especially, has to think about in addition to just getting the airplane on the ground. So normally you have 2 engines. You're thinking, I'm going to make my turn off. I'm going to taxi to the gate. Okay, none of that's going to happen. I'm down to 1 engine. I want to roll out the entire runway because I don't need, if I slam on the brakes and I'm very heavy when I land, I might overheat those brakes. If I overheat those brakes, you could create another fire. Now you've got a secondary problem that you created that you could have avoided if you just rolled all the way out and were a little bit lighter on the brakes. Although you do have to stop this jet. Like you said, you're landing faster than normal, heavier than normal. And then most of us would stop on the runway because there's lots of pavement around us on the runway for the airport rescue and firefighting crew to show up. The cool thing is that the fire chief has a little, it's like a little ray gun thing. It's a thermometer that he points at the engine like you have in your pizza oven, and he points it at it. It gives him a readout right on the screen of how hot that engine is. So he can tell you right there, okay, here's what I see. Flames are out, smoke is out, whatever. And it's invaluable then to get that if another pilot looks at it and says, hey, buddy, I can see from the outside of your airplane, I think you need to get out. That's really great information. So there's lots of things. It's a very fluid situation in a situation like that. Why would you hesitate as a captain to just not evacuate on every time you lose an engine, no matter what? Pop the slides and send everybody out. Why would you not do that?
Real quick before that, though, when I say going down the runway before, you don't want to just trundle down the runway. The objective is to stop the airplane and get the fire people to it. So it's not like we're just going to roll for a mile. There's a balance between overcooking it and killing time.
Got it. Yeah.
So you want to, if you go stop 1,000 feet farther or something. And the other thing is the brakes cook off, they spike about 15 minutes later.
Yeah.
Now, not evacuating is invariably people always get hurt. Invariably, we tend to have very typical 1 or 2 broken legs per evacuation.
Right.
I don't know that for a fact. I'm just saying this, all the reports that I read. It's almost like there's always someone getting injured, And then granted, they're minor, where they're saying, well, the risk is burning in the airplane. They go, well, the airplanes are designed and they operate and they do with gear fires and all that and the evacuation, the heavyweight boarding stops, the gear catches on fire a lot of times. People think, oh, you do a heavyweight thing and go, no, no, the landing gears catch on fire in testing. And there's a time limit. I don't know how many minutes, but it's 5 or 10 minutes that the fire crew cannot touch the airplane during the certification. So a gear well fire or in the engine pod itself can be distressing, but it doesn't mean it's a drastic emergency right now if you have help a minute or two away.
Yeah, right. And a good captain will evaluate all that stuff. And you're right. People can twist ankles. They can break legs coming down those slides. So you have to weigh that against, the other external things that are evolving as you're going. And you're right
Yes.
about the gear, because the gear will heat up and it takes a while for that to really cook. It may be a 15 minutes after you touch down, you think everything is fine, and all of a sudden you get a little flame that comes out of those landing gear. Now, fortunately, the fire trucks are right there on the scene, and hopefully they can put that stuff out and keep everybody on the airplane. So, and even I learned something today from you, Bert. See, I always learn something from you. Like, I'm thinking in my mind, I'm probably just going to roll out all the way to the end. It was really well said. Take the appropriate amount of runway without having to slam on the brakes, but you do want to get the fire crews around you to take a look to make sure that you're okay. So if you can do that in 3/4 of the runway, great, good on you. And I'll put that in my Rolodex now for going forward about, how I want to handle it if something like that comes up in the future.
Yeah, because you think like in LAX, really, 25 left, we make that left-hand high speed. I don't know which one it is, but it's right opposite our gates. We make that standard turn there. There's one that if you land shorter, you have to taxi down between the runways a bit, but that, and then the next is a 90. But that 90, all of those are probably too much energy dissipation, in my opinion, if you're coming in single engine heavyweight, because you're putting more heat stress into the tires.
Yeah. Really well said, Bert. That's a good way to wrap it up. That's what we're trying to do on social media now, is have that hangar flying, hangar talk conversation that pilots used to have on a rainy day around the big table in the hangar when they couldn't go flying. So it's great to hear from your perspective on how you would handle these things. And I've learned something today as well. So Bert Booth, thank you for joining us on Hangar Flying today. Great interview, my friend. I'm going to tell you, keep the blue side up and fly safe when you're out there. Thanks for joining us, Bert. Thank you. There was me talking to Bert, and I love Bert. He's just a good guy. Bert was kind of hard on me sometimes as a FO. I flew with him maybe a dozen or more times, which in our business is a lot. And Bert taught me a lot about not just flying, but also the airplane, because he was really good on the systems. And I think you could get that from the interview. What are your thoughts about my interview with Bert?
Yeah, I mean it's just amazing to see all levels. Last week we had obviously a young pilot, and now we're going the full scale the other direction to see somebody with probably one of the most experienced that we've ever seen or talked to. So it's really awesome to see the wisdom, and that's what's really cool about this thing is everybody's at different levels, and you're always learning something from somebody else, regardless of there's you as well as I know in this industry, you're never going to stop learning. You're always going to be picking up something and have something of value from somebody else. And so it's great to see somebody that's like knows the airplane, that knows what they're talking about, and give it like a full context, because it's like I love learning from that.
Yeah, yeah, I do too. I do too. And again, I hope the audience got a good opinion of that as well. So thanks for that, Gary, and thanks again to Bert Booth for joining us on that interview. Okay. Well, it's time to bring this baby in for a landing, as they say. So let's finish off with additions, deletions, and corrections. I know, Gary, that you're pretty much perfect on the stuff that you put out. Do you have anything from the past week or any time in your life that you would like to do an addition, deletion, or correction with for the audience?
I'm not really the YouTube superstar like you are over here, where you get almost a video a day. So the only show I've done since our last video is I did a live show on Sunday, and so that was, and really it was just, and actually, I covered the Delta fire, and it's as far as I know, I didn't get anything wrong because I kept it pretty broad. But apparently, according to the comments in the last video, as I was bullying you, so I gotta correct myself for that. But no, but most of the comments were all great, and everybody was excited and like really they're very nice with everything. So I think that this was it's been good, and I just don't really have much to say just because I don't have as much content now.
Well, there you have it. Gary got it all right this past week, which is wonderful. Okay, here's what I've got for my correction of the week. I did a video earlier on this really wacky hijacking in Vancouver. So this student hijacks a Cessna 172 down in Victoria, flies it all the way up to Vancouver, just flies over the top of this international airport doing circles and protesting climate change. So this guy's on the radio reading his manifesto, I guess. We didn't repeat any of it on the channel. We're not going to support that sort of thing. So he does this, and then the controller brings the whole thing to an end by basically broadcasting to everybody at the airport, hey folks, just stay where you are right now. We're not sure how long this is going to last, but NORAD has been called and they're on the way. So if you're the guy in the Cessna and you hear that that NORAD has been called and fighter jets with missiles are on their way, it's going to change your frame of mind about how long you want to continue your protest. So the guy in the Cessna goes right out to final, turns around, and lands on the runway right away. And I said at the time, I don't know if NORAD got called or not. It turns out they did. All right. The controller actually called NORAD, and fighter jets were dispatched, and fighter jets showed up. So this guy, for all of his, what he did with that airplane, at least had the smarts to bring that thing down and land it before he got shot out of the sky. And good on
how's
our...
How's that for climate change with using a missile? How's that for climate change?
Yeah, exactly. And so, good to our NORAD buddies for answering the call and showing up. And it had a good resolution. He got his manifesto out. He landed safely. Nobody was hurt. Vancouver obviously was inconvenienced for some time. But not all hijackings are the same. And this is by far the strangest hijacking I've ever heard of. And so if you want more on it, go check out my video on it. But to just clarify what happened at the end, NORAD did show up for that. And as the guy in the Cessna would say, if he was quoting Maxwell Smart, he missed it by that much. All right? So with that being said, Gary, it's time to wrap it up. Thanks for joining us this week. Any last thoughts from you?
I appreciate you having me on as always, and I'm excited for the next one. This was a little more drama-filled episode, but that's good. We're going to take it all different angles, and I'm excited for next week.
All right. Great, folks. Thanks for joining us. That was Gary B. Pilot. Go throw some love his way at his channel. He's that close to 100,000 subs, so let's give him that little silver play button. And we'll see you next time on Hangar Flying. I'm Captain Steeeve.